Week 8, Ministest2. Number 1. Dear Ruth Allen, I hope this message finds you well. My name is Orville Rivera, and I recently joined the team to work on various corporate strategy initiatives. One of my current responsibilities is to lead the Quality Systems Project. As I embark on this task, I'm in the initial stages of gathering information about the existing systems and understanding the requirements from the user's perspective. Given your role and expertise, I believe your insights would be invaluable to ensure the success of this endeavor. I would greatly appreciate the opportunity to discuss the project with you in more detail, including current workflows, user expectations, and any other insights you may have. Would it be possible for us to schedule a meeting later this week at your convenience? Thank you for considering my request, Ruth. Best regards, Orville Rivera. Number 2. The day came for the operation, and we arrived at the hospital early in the morning. Sal was taken into surgery, and I went down to the chapel to pray. Tears were streaming down my face. I prayed like I had never prayed before. I just wanted to see this man, whom I loved so much, come out of the surgery and be free of this threatening disease. I went back up to the waiting room and sat there with our daughter for what seemed like an eternity. The doctor finally came into the room. All I could see was his eyes. He said that the surgery went well, and they removed any possible lingering cancer cells. I started to cry again, but with joy this time that this man I loved would be by my side again, healthy and smiling, and looking forward to all the beautiful things that life had in store for us. Number 3. Avoiding scientific jargon is not as hard as it seems, as articles written for the public, for government, and even industry usually focus on the application of the science, not on the science itself. It is nearly always possible to describe the application of science in plain language. Nevertheless, scientists sometimes complain that the translation of science into plain language devalues it or dumbs it down. However, if the use of scientific terminology will only cause the audience to misunderstand or, worse, completely misinterpret what is being said, then it makes no sense to use it, as the result will only be confusion. Scientists should never expect people outside their discipline to understand the exact meaning they ascribe to a specialized term, even an apparently simple one like model. Every effort should be made to rephrase the language so that it has meaning to the audience. This sometimes takes more time and effort than some researchers can spare, and is the reason for the growing value of the skilled communicator as a messenger and interpreter between science and society. Number 4. Creativity is significantly different from pursuit of excellence. When limits to excellence begin to operate, only creativity and innovation can take companies to different trajectories. In a competitive and uncertain world, companies that are creative would most certainly have advantage over companies that are not. Nevertheless, creativity figures low in corporate agenda as a work or organizational ethic that needs to be institutionalized. For most organizations, only the visible working of an employee mind to follow the prescribed practices is relevant. The employee mind is considered similar to a black box, One can never fathom what happens inside a human brain, nor is it necessary. For most organizations, their environmental view rarely goes beyond an explored business canvas into unexplored white spaces. One has to have deep pockets to lose money on white spaces. By failing to dip into the thought processes that go through the black boxes, companies miss out on the opportunities of white space growth that lies ahead of them. Number 5. Life is perhaps 5% or less what happens to us, and 95% or more how we interpret and respond to what is happening. It is our interpretation of external events that gives them meaning. Situations and circumstances are neutral until we decide what they mean, whether positive, negative, or insignificant. Individuals in the excellence category refuse to accept the limiting biases and judgments of others. They make their own interpretations and decide accordingly. There is an often noted parable about a shoe factory that sends 2 marketing scouts to a distant country to study the possibilities of expanding the shoe business. The first scout sends back a message that the situation is hopeless, no one wears shoes, and there is no market. The other scout responds enthusiastically that this is an outstanding business opportunity since no one has shoes. In any situation, the meaning we give to circumstances determines what we see and how we think and act. Number 6. One area of research that's become increasingly popular among food scientists is the arena of phantom aromas. Once in a while, you might imagine a smell that isn't actually around you. Aroma is the sense that is most strongly associated with memory, and this relationship can be manipulated during cooking to trick our brain to reconstruct what it perceives the food should taste like. Ham is a salted, cured meat, and we've learned to associate the aroma of ham with saltiness. In a taste experiment, the presence of ham aroma in food samples convinced a group of people that their food tasted saltier. You can play with this yourself. If you repeatedly use aromatic spices such as cinnamon, rosewater, and vanilla in desserts, you start to associate those aromas with sweetness. The next time you make a dessert, such as polenta kheer, cut back on the amount of added sweetener and add a bit more of the sweeter aromatic spice. Your dinner companions will probably find that the dessert tastes very sweet. Number 7. Over-optimism may be partially explained by representativeness bias. Representativeness bias is the result of a heuristic whereby individuals generalize from particular representative cases even when better general statistical information exists. It is easy to see why the representativeness heuristic might be useful in everyday reasoning. Specific information is often more accurate or more useful than general information, and favoring it may represent a useful cognitive shortcut when assessing probabilities. However, when this assumption fails, the representativeness heuristic can lead to bizarre and erroneous judgments. Over-optimism may result from representativeness when, for example, individuals infer from knowledge about a specific car accident involving a bad driver that bad driving correlates with accidents more highly than it does in fact. In this case, even if they believe they are average drivers, they will systematically underestimate the probability that they will be involved in an accident because the representativeness heuristic will have generated an underestimation of the probability that average drivers are involved in accidents. Number 9. Francis William Aston, a British chemist and physicist, was born in Harborne, England, the son of a metal merchant. He was educated at Mason College, the forerunner of Birmingham University, where he studied chemistry. From 1898 until 1900, he did research under P.F.F. Franklin on optical rotation. He left Birmingham in 1900 to work in a Wolverhampton brewery for 3 years. During this time, he continued with scientific research in a home laboratory where he worked on the production of vacua for X-ray discharge tubes. This work came to the notice of J.H. Poynting of the University of Birmingham, who invited Aston to work with him. He remained at Birmingham until 1910, when he moved to Cambridge as research assistant to J.J. Thomson. He became a research fellow at Cambridge in 1920 and stayed there for the rest of his life, apart from the war years spent at the Royal Aircraft Establishment, Farnborough. Aston's main work, for which he received the Nobel Prize for Chemistry in 1922, was on the design and use of the mass spectrograph, which was used to clear up several outstanding problems and became one of the basic tools of the new atomic physics. Number 12. Requests to take part politically arise from a variety of sources, through social media, or in a sermon at church, or from the newsletter of an organization of which one is a member, or directly from a friend, neighbor, or coworker. Because those who attempt to get others involved in politics acts as rational prospectors, the ordinary processes through which people are asked to take part do not ameliorate the class bias in individual political voice. Seeking to get results as efficiently as possible, rational prospectors aim their requests at those who are likely not only to say yes, but also, on assenting, to participate effectively. Often they target people who have been active in the past. The result is that participation undertaken in response to requests from others brings in a disproportionate share of previous activists, which in turn exaggerates the socioeconomic status bias of political participation. In this way, ordinary processes of recruitment to political involvement do not simply replicate the socioeconomic structuring of political participation, they actually amplify it. Number 13. Storing too many memories could slow down the process of retrieval, so memories that are deemed irrelevant are quietly erased. This is why you probably cannot remember what you had for breakfast 2 Fridays ago, as such information is unlikely to be useful. This, of course, raises the question as to how we can determine in advance whether or not a memory is likely to be useful in the future. One factor is emotion. In times of great stress, people will often have very detailed memories of the event. In extreme cases, this can manifest itself as post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Sufferers of PTSD can be overwhelmed by memories of traumatic events and can show hypervigilance in threatening situations. Although PTSD is clearly maladaptive, it may be an extreme form of a process that is evolutionarily useful. It would surely be good design to ensure that an animal that has had, for example, a near-death experience would learn from that experience and display vigilance in similar situations. Number 14. One example of information that has greatest value when it is in the awareness of a human operator can be found in the context of driving. Vehicles today are designed with increasingly sophisticated sensor packages aimed at detecting a variety of aspects of the driving environment. For example, forward-looking cameras and forward-looking radar systems can judge the distance to vehicles in front of a driver. Computations that measure this information over time reveal changes in distance. This information can be used to alert a driver when the change in distance for a given vehicle speed is rapid enough to suggest a collision might take place. That information is important, but it is only valuable if the driver acts on it, unless, of course, the vehicle itself acts on it without driver intervention. The key here is that the driver must have the ability to pay attention to the information for the information to have value to the driver. If the driver is distracted by a phone, for example, they might fail to process the important information the vehicle is presenting. Number 15. A biologist, Tyler Volk, points out that cells are self-generated dynamic entities that at any given moment are always on the cusp between persisting and dying. They manage to survive by using their metabolism to stay ahead in this game. When metabolic wastes are expelled, the result is a loss of molecules. To compensate, cells also use metabolism to grow new molecules. If the exchange is at least equal, the cell can persist in its present form. If more molecules are generated than are lost, which adds protection against dying, net growth results, and the cell gets bigger. But a cell can only grow so much, as larger cells require more nutrients, and the cell runs up against a basic principle of physics. As a sphere gets bigger, its interior increases to a greater degree than its surface area. For a cell, this makes it harder for the surface to keep the flow of nutrients high enough to sustain the ever larger interior. So what's a cell to do? It divides in half and starts the process all over as it approaches its useful size limit. This achieves a balance between growth and persistence. Number 16. In a study, Iowa State University researchers read people lists of words and then asked for each list to be recited back either right away, after 15 seconds of rehearsal, or after 15 seconds of doing very simple math problems that prevented rehearsal. The subjects who were allowed to reproduce the lists right after hearing them did the best. Those who had 15 seconds to rehearse before reciting came in second. The group distracted with math problems finished last. Later, when everyone thought they were finished, they were all surprised with a pop quiz. Write down every word you can recall from the lists. Suddenly, the worst group became the best. Short-term rehearsal gave purely short-term benefits. Struggling to hold on to information and then recall it had helped the group distracted by math problems transfer the information from short-term to long-term memory. The group with more and immediate rehearsal opportunity recalled nearly nothing on the pop quiz. Repetition, it turned out, was less important than struggle. Number 17. Psychological safety plays a powerful role in the science of failing well. It allows people to ask for help when they're in over their heads, which helps eliminate preventable failures. It helps them report and hence catch and correct errors to avoid worse outcomes, and it makes it possible to experiment in thoughtful ways to generate new discoveries. Think about the teams that you've been a part of at work or at school. These groups probably varied in psychological safety. Maybe in some you felt completely comfortable speaking up with a new idea or disagreeing with a team leader. In other teams, you might have felt it was better to hold back, to wait and see what happened or what other people did and said before sticking your neck out. That difference is now called psychological safety, and I have found in my research that it's an emergent property of a group, not a personality difference. This means your perception of whether it's safe to speak up at work is unrelated to whether you're an extrovert or an introvert. Instead, it's shaped by how people around you react to things that you and others say and do. Number 18. We live in a highly mobile world where people are regularly uprooted from their home locales. Some do so by choice, but for others, political or economic conditions force them to relocate to vastly different physical and cultural places. In these circumstances, aside from their private realms, public space plays a role in creating a sense of belonging to a new place. The sensory qualities of public space, the smell of the sea, a familiar tree, the design of a fence, the quality of light, a soccer field, have an utmost capacity to create a connection to home for the new arrivals. These seemingly ephemeral qualities of public space can bring deep psychological comfort by triggering a familiar memory, creating an interconnectedness, or forming a continuum between the past and the present. These experiences in and of public space can also establish a common or shared experience between the locals and the newcomers. Number 19. The brain does not try to use all of its billions of neurons to represent everything. Different brain regions represent different kinds of sensory stimuli. For example, the visual cortex at the back of the brain has neurons that respond to different visual inputs. There are neuronal groups whose firing patterns correspond spatially to the structure of the input. For example, when a column of neurons fires together to represent the fact that a line is part of the visual stimulus. Thus, different parts of the brain have groups of neurons that fire when different kinds of visual, olfactory, smell, taste, auditory, and touch stimuli are presented. The human brain can do a lot more than just represent stimuli presented to it, because a group of neurons can respond to inputs from many groups of neurons. This can produce a combined representation of what the input neurons represent. For example, there are regions in the frontal cortex of monkeys where the sensory modalities of taste, vision, and smell come together, enabling the representation of fruits and their key properties. It is clear, therefore, that the brain is a superb representational device. Number 20. For the last few centuries, experts have worried ceaselessly that we aren't exercising enough. Nationalism is one major source of this anxiety. Just as ancient Spartans were required and Romans were urged to be fit enough to fight as soldiers, flag-waving leaders and educators increasingly encouraged ordinary citizens to participate in sports and other forms of exercise as preparation for military service. An especially influential proponent of this movement was Friedrich Jahn, the father of gymnastics. Following Napoleon's humiliating strings of victories over German armies in the early 19th century, Jahn argued that educators had a responsibility to restore the physical and moral strength of his nation's youth with gymnastics, hiking, running, and more. Later, similar worries in America were spurred by the embarrassing lack of fitness among many men who enlisted or were drafted for World Wars I and II, and by the poor state of fitness among school children at the start of the Cold War. National movements to drum up fitness for the sake of the state still occur in China and elsewhere. Number 21. Many climatologists accept there is a real possibility of global climatic warming due to an enhanced greenhouse effect. As with many large-scale changes, there would be winners and losers. Were climate belts to shift toward higher latitudes, which seems the most likely overall result, parts of the Sahara and southern Russia would receive increased rainfall. They would benefit, and their agricultural output would increase. On the other hand, southern Europe and the United States cereal belt might become drier. If warming produced a rate of evaporation that exceeded the increase in the rate of precipitation, soils would become more arid. It may be, however, that warming will be experienced as a reduction in the fall of temperature at night due to increased cloudiness, with little or no change in daytime temperatures. In that event, nighttime frosts would become less frequent, soils would become somewhat moisture, and agriculture would benefit. Number 22. Social media platforms enhance learning experiences, increase student interaction, and foster engagement. However, just like with other pedagogical activities, understand the why behind what you do with social media. Knowing this reason will guide you with choosing the most effective digital tool for reaching your instructional goals. Be sure to match your instructional goals with digital tools that are accessible on websites and apps. When selecting digital tools, refrain from being attracted to apps with fireworks and flying colors because such highly attractive apps may not necessarily serve your academic purposes nor your students' learning needs. Selecting a social media platform is a practical decision based on making a good fit with a targeted skill. For example, many social media platforms do not fit well with skills such as writing essays and giving formal presentations. Yet, these platforms can enhance other pedagogical activities such as classroom assessment techniques by allowing students to provide virtual input about a topic through social interaction. Number 23. The only way to produce crystal clear writing is to know how a reader will respond to the choices you make in composing text and graphics. You need to know which sentence structures are most easily understood, which organization of material into sections is most easily followed, and so on. It's certainly possible to offer some general rules along these lines. For example, use the active voice, divide the paper into introduction, methods, results, and discussion sections, and use a figure instead of a table when quantities are to be compared. In principle, you could tape a long list of such rules above your computer and treat it as the voice of authority on how to reach readers. But long lists of rules are boring. Besides, using them makes writing mechanical, and good writing sometimes entails knowing when to bend the rules instead of following them. Furthermore, using a list of rules is oddly indirect. Instead of relying on rules you've been told will produce clear text, surely it would be more effective to understand how readers think and write to that understanding. In order to produce clear writing, you need to grasp the viewpoint of your audience and apply general writing rules flexibly. Number 24 and 25. In the early 1970s, the Peace Corps office in Botswana was concerned by the number of volunteers who seemed to be burnt out, failing in their assignments, leaving the assigned villages and increasingly hostile to their Tswana hosts. The Peace Corps asked American anthropologist Hoyt Alverson, who was familiar with Tswana culture and society, for advice. Alverson discovered that one major problem the Peace Corps volunteers were having involved exactly the issue of similar actions having very different meanings. The volunteers complained that the Tswana would never leave them alone. Whenever they tried to get away and sit by themselves for a few minutes to have some private time, one or more Tswana would quickly join them. This made the Americans angry. From their perspective, everyone is entitled to a certain amount of privacy and time alone. To the Tswana, however, human life is social life. The only people who want to be alone are witches and the insane. Because these young Americans did not seem to be either, the Tswana, who saw them sitting alone, naturally assumed that there had been a breakdown in hospitality and that the volunteers would welcome some company. Here, one behavior, a person walking out into a field and sitting by himself or herself, had two very different meanings. Number 26 through 28. In the heart of the forest, there lived a young eagle named Edge and his twin brother Joe. Joe could soar high in the sky and experience the freedom of flight, while Edge was born with a damaged wing and was unable to fly. Although this could have discouraged him greatly, he never lost hope and always believed that he would one day achieve his dream of flying alongside Joe. One day, Joe and Edge met an old sage where they were looking for food. Known for his wisdom, the sage lived alone in a small hut hidden among the trees. Wanting his twin brother to achieve his dream, Joe eagerly asked if the sage could help Edge fly. The sage took pity on the young eagle and told Edge about a mystical herb. The herb grew on the top of the tallest mountain in the forest and glowed blue. He said that if Edge was able to find the mystical herb and bring it back to him, he would be able to fix his wing so he could fly. Finding the mystical herb would be difficult and dangerous, so Joe tried to persuade him not to go. However, Edge was determined to find the herb. In the end, Joe understood and wished him a safe and successful journey. Edge set off on his journey, which was especially challenging because of his damaged wing, forcing him to climb the mountain on foot. At one point, a sudden landslide wiped out the path he had been following, making him start the climb all over again. He encountered many other obstacles along the way, but he never gave up. Finally, after several days of climbing, he reached the top of the mountain and found the mystical herb. When Edge returned to the sage used the mystical herb to fix Edge's wing. With Joe cheering him on, Edge spread his wings and took off into the sky for the first time. He felt the wind rushing past him and the sun shining on his feathers. From that day forward, the two brothers often flew together and explored the vast skies. Edge became a symbol of hope and determination, and even though he never forgot the sage who had helped him achieve his dream, Edge also knew that his true spirit came from within, which gave him the strength to overcome any obstacle.